A general once dreamed of planting an American flag on Iranian soil. That dream is still buried in the dark. Not because of a missile, not because of a drone, not even because of a lack of will, but because of mountains, because of deserts, and because of a war machine, built in complete silence over 25 years, that has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Today, I'm going to tell you what the news channels won't show you. I'm going to walk you through, step by step, what happens the day American boots hit Iranian ground. What happens to the war, what happens to oil, what happens to food, what happens to the global economy, what happens to the American empire itself. And at the end, I'm going to show you something that will completely change how you see all of it. Because the most dangerous part of this story is not the war. The most dangerous part is the plan behind the war. Let's start with what we know. Donald Trump recently addressed the American people and declared that the United States is on track to complete its military objectives in Iran, promising overwhelming force over the coming weeks. He insisted the economy is strong, America is winning. But here's something history has taught us again and again. When a leader feels the need to publicly announce that he is winning, it almost always signals the opposite. Napoleon said he was winning in Russia, right up until his army froze to death in the snow. The United States government told the public the Vietnam War was going well for years, while body bags came home by the thousands. So when a president goes on television to tell you things are going great, that is not reassurance. That is a signal worth paying very close attention to. At the same time, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth unveiled what he is calling the Greater North America Strategy, a security perimeter stretching from Greenland to the Panama Canal, from Alaska all the way down to Venezuela. Think about what that means for a moment. America is fighting a war in Iran it appears to be struggling with, while simultaneously pressuring Canada, Denmark, Mexico, Colombia, and Cuba, and extending its military and economic reach across the entire Western Hemisphere. To most observers watching from the outside, this looks completely chaotic, reckless, incoherent. But what if it isn't? What if every single one of these moves, Iran, Canada, Greenland, Venezuela, is connected? What if there is a blueprint? That is what we are going to find out. Segment 3. Why Iran is different from every war America has fought. Before we get into what happens on the ground, you need to understand why Iran is unlike any country America has ever tried to invade. Iran is roughly 4 times the size of Iraq. Let that sink in. Iraq nearly broke the United States military. Iraq, which is 1/4 the size of Iran. Iran's population is 90 million people. That is nearly 3 times the population of Iraq when the US invaded in 2003. But the real challenge isn't the size. It isn't even the population. It is the geography. The Zagros mountain range runs the entire length of Iran's western border, which is the most logical entry point for any attack coming from Iraq. These are not small hills. These are massive ancient mountain ranges, steep, rugged, filled with caves and passes that have been used for warfare for thousands of years. These mountains are a defender's dream and an attacker's nightmare. Iranian forces could hide inside them, launch drones and missiles, and vanish back into the terrain before American forces could even identify where the attack came from. Every helicopter is a target. Every supply convoy is a target. Every fuel truck is a target. What about attacking from the east, through Pakistan? You would be crossing some of the most inhospitable desert terrain on Earth, from an enormous distance from Tehran. And you would be doing it through a country that has its own complicated relationship with both America and Iran. What about from the south, via the Persian Gulf? More mountains. An even longer overland route to the capital. And you are already deep inside a body of water that Iran can close at will. There is no easy entry point. Every direction is a trap. Now here are the numbers that should make every military analyst stop and pause. America currently has approximately 150,000 troops stationed across the entire Middle East. Military analysts estimate that conquering and, critically, holding it is. Iran would require somewhere between 3 million and 4 million soldiers. America's entire active military number is approximately 1.3 million. The arithmetic does not add up. It does not even come close. And yet, the signals of an imminent ground invasion are real. Reserve soldiers are receiving deployment notices. Prediction markets, where ordinary people wager real money on real-world outcomes, are showing significant and growing bets on an imminent ground invasion. These are not trivial signals. These are the kinds of signals that precede real events. Let's walk through what actually happens, day by day, if U.S. forces enter Iran. Day 1. American forces cross the border from Iraq, or execute amphibious landings near the Strait of Hormuz. The news coverage will be spectacular. Explosions, footage of advancing troops, anchors talking about American military power. The word overwhelming will be used constantly. And in those first days, the coverage will be accurate. America will capture territory. Visible targets will be destroyed. The initial advance will look like a victory. Week 2. Things start to get complicated. Supply lines are longer than expected. A convoy is hit by a drone strike, the origin unknown. A helicopter goes down in mountainous terrain. Week 4. The pattern begins to emerge. The same pattern that defined Vietnam. The same pattern that defined Afghanistan for 20 years. The same pattern that defined post-invasion Iraq. Supply lines severed. Drone strikes targeting fuel trucks. Every aircraft becomes a vulnerability rather than an asset. Soldiers fighting an enemy that melts into the landscape, that has no uniform, no fixed base, no centralized structure to destroy. Here is why this matters so much. Iran has not been preparing for this war for 5 years, not even 10 years. Iran has been preparing specifically for an American ground invasion for 25 years. Underground bases are buried deep within mountain ranges, in locations that American intelligence has not fully mapped and may never fully map. Missiles and drone stockpiles are concealed in facilities that do not appear on any satellite image. Entire weapon systems have been engineered for a single purpose: to destroy American helicopters, tanks, armored vehicles, and supply convoys in mountainous terrain. And here's the critical detail that almost no one is talking about. Throughout the entire ongoing air campaign, Iran has drawn on only a fraction of its underground military infrastructure. The vast majority of its firepower has not yet been deployed, not because Iran can't use it, because Iran is waiting. America excels at the opening strike. It always has. Shock and awe. Overwhelming initial force. It is the prolonged fight, the grinding, attritional, years-long campaign that has historically broken every American military operation since World War II. Iran has studied exactly this pattern and built its entire defense doctrine around one goal: survive the opening strike and then make the long war unbearable. Segment 5. The Strait of Hormuz, the most powerful weapon on Earth. Now we move to the dimension that most analysts are catastrophically underestimating. The moment a ground invasion begins, Iran does not just fight back militarily. Iran activates its most powerful economic weapon. The Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, at its narrowest point only 33 kilometers wide, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. And through that narrow strip of water passes 20% of all the oil in the entire world. Iran would mine the strait, attack oil tankers, strike Gulf Cooperation Council energy infrastructure, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, simultaneously. Iranian officials have been explicit about their objective: drive oil prices to $200 per barrel. It currently sits around $100. Doubling the price of oil overnight would send shockwaves through every economy on Earth. But that is only the beginning, because the Strait of Hormuz carries far more than oil. RS, phosphates, ammonium, sulfur, and urea. The core ingredients of agricultural fertilizers all pass through the strait. If this flow is disrupted, global food production is directly threatened. This is not a story about more expensive petrol at the pump. This is a story about food shortages, famine, people going hungry, not in one country, but across the world. And it gets even worse. Helium and sulfuric acid, both absolutely critical to semiconductor manufacturing, also transit the Strait of Hormuz. Semiconductors are not just in your phone. They are in everything: cars, medical equipment, military systems, the artificial intelligence infrastructure that the entire global economy is now being rebuilt around. Disrupt semiconductor supply chains, and you are not just slowing down technology companies, you are dismantling the nervous system of the modern world. JP Morgan, the world's largest bank, has already issued a warning that the world could face a severe oil supply crisis within weeks if this conflict escalates to its full potential. When the world's largest financial institution issues that kind of warning, it is not being dramatic, it is doing the math. A full Iranian escalation produces $200 oil, global food shortages, semiconductor supply chain collapse, and a worldwide economic depression. Not a recession, not a downturn, depression, the kind that reshapes societies, topples governments, and rewrites history. To understand why this war threatens the very existence of the American empire, you need to understand something that is almost never explained in mainstream media: the petrodollar system. In 1973, following the oil crisis, the United States made a historic deal with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. The arrangement was simple, but profound. The Gulf states would price all their oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would guarantee their security, militarily, politically, diplomatically. Here is why this arrangement is the most important financial deal in human history. Every nation on Earth needs oil to function, to run factories, to grow food, to transport goods, to generate electricity, to field a military. Because every nation on Earth needs oil, and oil is priced in dollars. Every nation on Earth needs to hold dollars. This creates permanent, inescapable global demand for American currency. And that permanent global demand for dollars is the mechanism, the only mechanism, by which the United States is able to carry and sustain $36 trillion in national debt. Without the petrodollar, there is no mechanism to fund that debt. The United States government could not borrow at the rates it currently borrows at. The entire financial architecture of American global dominance would cease to function. In structural terms, the petrodollar system functions like a Ponzi scheme, sustainable only as long as Gulf stability is maintained and the world keeps buying dollars to buy oil. Now look at who holds the most American debt. Japan, China, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Europe. These same countries source the overwhelming majority of their energy from the Middle East. If a ground invasion of Iran destabilizes Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, disrupts their oil infrastructure, what happens? These nations lose confidence in the petrodollar system. They start reducing their dollar holdings. They begin looking for alternatives. The Chinese yuan, gold, bilateral currency agreements. They stop purchasing American debt. And at that moment, the mechanism sustaining $36 trillion in debt does not slow down. It collapses. Interest rates spike to levels that make government borrowing impossible. The stock market crashes. The AI sector, which depends entirely on cheap capital and massive Gulf state sovereign wealth fund investment, implodes overnight. This is not a financial correction. This is not a market downturn. Well, this is the structural end of the American empire as it has existed since 1991. Everything described so far sounds catastrophic for America. A ground war it cannot win. Economic collapse. The end of the petrodollar. But ask a different question. Not, is this bad for America? Ask, who benefits when the Strait of Hormuz closes? Who benefits when Middle Eastern oil stops flowing to Europe, Japan, India, and China? The world doesn't stop needing oil. It simply needs to source it somewhere else. And that somewhere else is North America. America holds substantial domestic reserves. Canada holds enormous oil sands. Venezuela holds the single largest proven reserves on the planet. And Washington has been quietly expanding its influence there. Mexico sits right next door. So here is the strategic logic. Stated plainly, America starts a war it cannot win militarily. The Middle East destabilizes. The world becomes desperately dependent on North American energy and food. America loses the war, but wins the resource competition that follows. This explains Trump's entire foreign policy pattern. Pressure on Canada, Greenland, Venezuela, Mexico. He is not being erratic. He's assembling a self-sufficient continental fortress. 2 oceans as natural defenses, abundant in energy and food, positioned to sell resources to a desperate world at premium prices. This is not an original playbook. Putin already demonstrated a version of it in Ukraine. When Russia invaded in 2022, the consensus was unanimous. The sanctions will collapse the Russian economy within months. That consensus was wrong. Russia became more self-sufficient, not less. The sanctions meant to destroy it instead accelerated alternative trade networks, reducing dependence on the Western-dominated global order. The intellectual framework traces to Alexander Dugin, who argued that the Western liberal order carries within it the seeds of its own collapse. His prescription, don't prop it up, don't integrate into it, outlast it. The argument here is that Trump, whether consciously or independently, is applying the same framework to America, not trying to save the globalist order, not reforming it, deliberately collapsing it on American terms, and rebuilding from the wreckage a resource-exporting, self-sufficient North American power. What is being dismantled? The post-1991 American world order rested on 3 pillars: the financial dominance, the dollar as reserve currency, manufacturing offshored, Wall Street at the center, secular multiculturalism, open borders, cosmopolitan identity, liberal values spread globally, Pax Americana, America as guarantor of global security while allies free rode on its military. This system worked for a generation. But it also hollowed out American manufacturing, exploded inequality, and accumulated $36 trillion in debt. Trump's project is to dismantle all 3 pillars: resources over finance, nationalism over multiculturalism, Fortress America over global guarantees. And to achieve that, the old system must not be reformed. It must be broken. The most efficient mechanism? A Middle Eastern war that collapses the petrodollar and forces global trade to restructure around North American resources. 2 scenarios. 2 plausible outcomes. Neither ends well for the world. Both end with North America more powerful. Scenario 1. America loses the ground war, troops withdraw, the petrodollar collapses, a global depression follows, But North America, insulated, energy-rich, becomes the most stable region in a destabilized world. American manufacturing revives, the working class benefits. Scenario 2, a prolonged war of attrition. No clean victory, no full withdrawal. The conflict drags on, oil stays expensive. Gradually, North America consolidates as the world's indispensable supplier. Different paths, same destination. The old order ends, North America rises, and the people who pay the heaviest price, ordinary soldiers, ordinary Iranians, the global poor, had no role in designing any of it. Conclusion. So, the full picture. A ground invasion of Iran faces brutal terrain and a defense infrastructure built over 25 years to defeat exactly this kind of attack. If it proceeds, Iran escalates. Hormuz closes, supply chains rupture, the global economy fractures. But the counterintuitive dimension is this. America may have been structurally positioned to benefit from precisely this collapse. A destabilized Middle East forces the world onto North American resources. The fortress continent becomes not a consequence of the war, but the purpose of it. Is this certain? No. Could Trump simply be acting on impulse and grievance? Absolutely. Both can be true simultaneously. But the structural logic exists. The pieces fit. The real question was never whether this strategy is clever. The real question is, who pays for it? And the answer, as it has always been in every empire, in every century, is ordinary people, on all sides.